2 Kings 9. Then Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him,
Tie up your garments and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth-Gilead. And when you arrive, look there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, and go in and have him rise from among his fellows and lead him to an inner chamber. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and say, Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee. Do not linger.
So the young man, the servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth-Gilead. And when he came, behold, the commanders of the army were in council. And he said,
I have a word for you, O commander.
And Jehu said,
To which of us all?
And he said,
To you, O commander.
So he arose and went into the house. And the young man poured the oil on his head, saying to him,
Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord over Israel. And you shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her.
Then he opened the door and fled. When Jehu came out to the servants of his master, they said to him,
Is all well? Why did this mad fellow come to you?
And he said to them,
You know the fellow and his talk.
And they said,
That is not true. Tell us now.
And he said,
Thus and so he spoke to me, saying, Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel.
Then in haste every man of them took his garment and put it under him on the bare steps. And they blew the trumpet and proclaimed,
Jehu is king!
Thus Jehu the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram with all Israel had been on guard at Ramoth-Gilead against Hazael king of Syria. But King Joram had returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael king of Syria. So Jehu said,
If this is your decision, then let no one slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel.
Then Jehu mounted his chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. And Ahaziah king of Judah had come down to visit Joram. Now the watchman was standing on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came, and said,
I see a company!
And Joram said,
Take a horseman and send to meet them, and let him say, Is it peace?
So a man on horseback went to meet him, and said,
Thus says the king, Is it peace?
And Jehu said,
What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me.
And the watchman reported, saying,
The messenger reached them, but he is not coming back.
Then he sent out a second horseman, who came to them and said,
Thus the king has said, Is it peace?
And Jehu answered,
What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me.
Again the watchman reported,
He reached them, but he is not coming back. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously.
Joram said,
Make ready.
And they made ready his chariot. Then Joram king of Israel and Ahaziah king of Judah set out, each in his chariot, and went to meet Jehu, and met him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. And when Joram saw Jehu, he said,
Is it peace, Jehu?
He answered,
What peace can there be, so long as the whorings and the sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many?
Then Joram reined about and fled, saying to Ahaziah,
Treachery, O Ahaziah!
And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength, and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he sank in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar his aide,
Take him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab his father, how the Lord made this pronouncement against him. As surely as I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, I will repay you on this plot of ground. Now therefore take him up and throw him on the plot of ground in accordance with the word of the Lord.
When Ahaziah the king of Judah saw this, he fled in the direction of Beth-Haggan, and Jehu pursued him and said,
Shoot him also!
And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam. And he fled to Megiddo and died there. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem, and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah began to reign over Judah. When Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. And as Jehu entered the gate, she said,
Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?
And he lifted up his face to the window and said,
Who is on my side? Who?
2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He said,
Throw her down!
So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled on her. Then he went in and ate and drank. And he said,
See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter.
But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. When they came back and told him, he said,
This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, This is Jezebel.
2 Kings 10. Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city, to the elders, and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab, saying,
Now then, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses, fortified cities also, and weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house.
But they were exceedingly afraid, and said,
Behold, the 2 kings could not stand before him. How then can we stand?
So he who was over the palace, and he who was over the city, together with the elders and the guardians, sent to Jehu, saying,
We are your servants, and we will do all that you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes.
Then he wrote to them a second letter, saying,
If you are on my side, and if you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons, and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time.
Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were bringing them up. And as soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets, and sent them to him at Jezreel. When the messenger came and told him,
They have brought the heads of the king's sons,
he said,
Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until the morning.
Then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people,
You are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him. But who struck down all these? Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah.
So Jehu struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his great men and his close friends and his priests, until he left him none remaining. Then he set out and went to Samaria. On the way, when he was at Beth-Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met the relatives of Ahaziah king of Judah, and he said,
Who are you?
And they answered,
We are the relatives of Ahaziah, and we came down to visit the royal princes and the sons of the queen mother.
He said,
Take them alive.
And they took them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth-Eked, 42 persons, and he spared none of them. And when he departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him. And he greeted him and said to him,
Is your heart true to my heart as mine is to yours?
And Jehonadab answered,
It is.
Jehu said,
If it is, Give me your hand.
So he gave him his hand, and Jehu took him up with him into the chariot. And he said,
Come with me, and see my zeal for the Lord.
So he had him ride in his chariot. And when he came to Samaria, he struck down all who remained to Ahab in Samaria, till he had wiped them out, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to Elijah. Then Jehu assembled all the people, and said to them,
Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. Now therefore call to me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers and all his priests. Let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live.
But Jehu did it with cunning, in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. And Jehu ordered,
Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal!
So they proclaimed it. And Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. And they entered the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. He said to him who was in charge of the wardrobe,
Bring out the vestments for all the worshippers of Baal.
So he brought out the vestments for them. Then Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab the son of Rechab, and he said to the worshippers of Baal,
Search, and see that there is no servant of the Lord here among you, but only the worshippers of Baal.
Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside, and said,
The man who allows any of those whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life.
So as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the officers,
Go in and strike them down. Let not a man escape.
So when they put them to the sword, the guard and the officers cast them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal, and they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal and burned it. And they demolished the pillar of Baal and demolished the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. Thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin, that is, the golden calves that were in Bethel and in Dan. And the Lord said to Jehu,
Because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the 4th generation shall sit on the throne of Israel.
But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin. In those days the Lord began to cut off parts of Israel. Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel. From the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites and the Reubenites, and the Manassites from Aroer, which is by the valley of the Arnon, that is, Gilead and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu, and all that he did, and all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. And Jehoahaz his son reigned in his place. The time that Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. 2 Kings 11. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal family. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus they hid him from Athaliah, so that he was not put to death. And he remained with her 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned over the land. But in the 7th year Jehoiada sent and brought the captains of the Kerites and of the guards, and had them come to him in the house of the Lord. And he made a covenant with them, and put them under oath in the house of the Lord, and he showed them the king's son. And he commanded them,
This is the thing that you shall do. 1/3 of you, those who come off duty on the Sabbath and guard the king's house, another third being at the gate sewer, and a third at the gate behind the guards, shall guard the palace. And the 2 divisions of you which come on duty in force on the Sabbath and guard the house of the Lord on behalf of the king shall surround the king, each with his weapons in his hand. And whoever approaches the ranks is to be put to death. Be with the king when he goes out and when he comes in.
The captains did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded. And they each brought his men who were to go off duty on the Sabbath, with those who were to come on duty on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. And the priest gave to the captains the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of the Lord. And the guard stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, around the altar and the house on behalf of the king. Then he brought out the king's son, and put the crown on him, and gave him the testimony. And they proclaimed him king and anointed him, and they clapped their hands and said,
Long live the king!
When Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she went into the house of the Lord to the people. And when she looked, there was the king standing by the pillar according to the custom, and the captains and the trumpeters beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried,
Treason! Treason!
Then Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains who were set over the army,
Bring her out between the ranks, and put to death with the sword anyone who follows her.
For the priest said,
Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord.
So they laid hands on her, and she went through the horses' entrance to the king's house, and there she was put to death. And Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and people, that they should be the Lord's people, and also between the king and the people. Then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and tore it down. His altars and his images they broke in pieces, and they killed Mattan the priest of Baal before the altars. And the priest posted watchmen over the house of the Lord. And he took the captains, the Carites, the guards, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of the Lord, marching through the gate of the guards to the king's house. And he took his seat on the throne of the kings. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet after Athaliah had been put to death with the sword at the king's house. Jehoash was 7 years old when he began to reign,